In the small provincial town of Tibur, nestled in the hills east of Rome where olive groves stretched toward distant mountains and the Anio River carved its ancient path through limestone, a girl named Livia learned her first lesson about worth. It was measured in blood, not the blood of battle or sacrifice, but the monthly blood that marked a woman as fertile, as valuable, as worthy of keeping. By 13, every girl in Tibur bled. By 14, those who hadn't were taken to healers. By 15, if the bleeding still hadn't come, families began to make difficult decisions. Livia was 17 when her parents finally accepted what the healers had been telling them for years. Their youngest daughter would never bear children. Her womb, as one particularly blunt physician put it, was closed by the God's will or nature's cruelty. The result is the same. The night her parents received the final diagnosis, Livia stood outside their door and listened to her mother weep. All those years, Julia sobbed, all that food, all that care, all those hopes for a good marriage, wasted. We still have Claudia and Marcella, her father Marcus replied, his voice heavy with resignation. Their marriages will have to support us. We can't afford to keep Livia any longer. What will we do with her? No man will take her. A long pause followed. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had the flat tone of someone who'd already decided. The Temple of Vesta always needs servants. They take girls who can't marry, women with afflictions. They call it serving the gods, but really it's just somewhere to put useless daughters. You want to sell our daughter to temple slavery? I want to ensure our other daughters don't suffer because we wasted resources on one who can give us nothing in return. Marcus's voice hardened. At least in the temple she'll be fed and housed. And the temple pays a small sum, enough to offset some of what we've spent on her. Livia pressed her hand against the door, feeling the worn wood beneath her palm, and understood with perfect clarity that her family was about to sell her for being broken. She should have been angry, should have stormed in and demanded to be heard, to be defended, to be loved despite her body's betrayal. But she felt only hollow acceptance. This was the world she'd been born into, a world where women were valued for their wombs above all else. The next morning, Marcus informed her of the decision over breakfast. He didn't meet her eyes. You'll go to the Temple of Vesta in Rome, he said, tone formal. They need servants to tend the sacred flame, to assist the Vestal virgins. It's honorable work, better than what most girls in your situation could hope for. My situation being that I'm barren, Livia said quietly. Your situation being that you cannot fulfill a woman's primary purpose, Marcus corrected. We've been patient. We've consulted healers. We've prayed to every god who might listen. But the truth is unchangeable. You will never marry, never bear children. The temple is your best option, and you'll be compensated for delivering me there. Her father's jaw tightened. The temple pays for new servants. That's customary. The cost of raising a defective daughter, Livia finished. I understand, Father. When do we leave? Tomorrow. I've already made the arrangements. Her mother said nothing, staring at her plate as if answers might be found in the pattern of breadcrumbs. That evening, Livia's older sisters came to her room. Claudia, married a year now and already pregnant, sat on the bed with tears streaming down her face. Marcella, betrothed and planning her wedding, stood by the window, her expression torn between pity and relief. I'm so sorry, Claudia whispered. If there was anything we could do. There isn't, Livia interrupted gently. And I wouldn't want you to sacrifice your own futures. You've done nothing wrong. Neither have mother and father, really. They're just following the logic of the world we live in. That doesn't make it right, Marcella said fiercely. You're our sister. Should, Livia agreed. But should and does are different things. She didn't cry that night, didn't rage or despair. She simply packed the few belongings she'd be allowed to take, a spare tunic, her mother's old shawl, the clay figurine of Diana her grandmother had given her when she was small, and prepared herself for the next phase of her life. The journey to Rome took 2 days. Marcus hired a cart rather than making Livia walk, a small mercy that suggested some lingering affection beneath the practical cruelty. They traveled mostly in silence. Rome emerged from the landscape like a fever dream made real. Livia had never seen the capital before. The city sprawled across 7 hills, a riot of marble temples and brick tenements, of grand forums and narrow alleys. The noise alone was overwhelming. Thousands of voices, the clatter of workshops, the calls of vendors. The Temple of Vesta sat in the Roman Forum, at the heart of the city's religious and political life. It was smaller than Livia expected, but exquisitely beautiful. A circular building of white marble with a conical roof and columns that seemed to glow in the afternoon sun. The sacred flame that had burned at its center for centuries sent a thin column of smoke rising toward the sky. Marcus led Livia through the temple's public areas into a courtyard where a priestess waited, a severe woman named Claudia Metella who examined Livia with the same dispassionate assessment a farmer might give livestock. "She's old for temple service," Metella observed. "Most girls come to us at 13 or 14. She's been ill," Marcus said carefully, "but she's healthy now, strong, capable of any work you require. And her affliction? She cannot bear children. The healers confirmed it." Metella's expression didn't change. "That's not uncommon among temple servants. The barren, the deformed, the cursed, we take them all. The gods care less about perfection than devotion." She quoted a price that made Marcus's eyes widen with relief. That's standard for a girl her age with basic literacy. The transaction was completed quickly. Coins exchanged, documents signed, ownership transferred. Marcus barely looked at Livia as he turned to leave. "Father," she called after him. He stopped but didn't turn around. "Thank you for not abandoning me entirely." His shoulders hunched slightly, as if the weight of what he'd done had suddenly become physical. "You're still my daughter. I want you safe, even if I can't keep you." He walked away without looking back, disappearing into the forum crowds. Livia stood in the temple courtyard and felt the severing of that final connection, the moment when she stopped being someone's daughter and became property of the gods instead. "Come," Metella commanded. "I'll show you where you'll sleep and work, and I'll explain the rules. They're simple but absolute. Break them, and you'll be flogged." The rules were what Livia expected. Don't speak to the Vestal virgins unless addressed. Don't leave temple grounds without permission. Tend the sacred flame with absolute devotion. If it goes out on your watch, you die. The servants' quarters were cramped but clean, a row of small cells carved into the rock beneath the temple. Livia was assigned a cell at the end of the row, away from the other servants. "They won't want to be near you," Metella explained matter-of-factly. "The barren ones are usually kept separate. Some believe the condition is contagious, or that bad luck follows those who can't give life. So even here, in the temple that supposedly took in the rejected, Livia would be isolated, set apart, marked as lesser." She unpacked her meager belongings, placing her grandmother's figurine on the small shelf above her sleeping mat. The clay Diana looked down at her with painted eyes that revealed nothing. That night, lying on her mat and listening to the distant sounds of the city, Livia allowed herself to finally feel the full weight of what had happened. She'd been born into a world that measured her worth by a function her body couldn't perform. She'd been raised by parents who'd loved her until that love became too expensive. She'd been sold to a temple not because of any devotion, but because she had nowhere else to go. She was 17 years old and her life was essentially over. She would spend decades scrubbing floors and tending fires, invisible to everyone except when her work was inadequate. She would live and die without leaving any mark on the world. A single tear slid down her cheek, then another. She let them fall silently, allowed herself this one moment of grief for the life she would never have, the children she would never bear, the family that had abandoned her because she was broken. Tomorrow she would begin her new life as a temple servant. She would tend the sacred flame with devotion, make herself invisible, and perhaps find some small purpose in the rituals. But tonight, in the darkness of a cell beneath the temple of Vesta, Livia mourned the death of all the futures she'd once imagined, and wondered if the gods who had cursed her would even notice one more servant among the dozens who tended their eternal flame. 3 years passed in the temple of Vesta, and Livia became what the priestesses had intended, invisible. She rose before dawn each morning to tend the sacred flame, carefully adding wood and adjusting coals so the fire burned steady and bright. She scrubbed marble floors until her knees ached and her hands bled. She assisted during ceremonies, standing in shadows while the Vestal virgins performed their sacred duties. She copied texts in the temple library when her other work was finished, her neat handwriting preserving prayers and rituals that dated back centuries. The other servants avoided her, as predicted. They made signs against evil when she passed, whispered that her curse might spread if they got too close. Even the Vestal virgins, who were supposed to be above such superstitions, kept their distance. Livia ate alone, worked alone, and slept in her isolated cell. She told herself it didn't matter. Loneliness was a small price to pay for safety, for food, for shelter. She'd been sold by her family. What did it matter if strangers rejected her too? But late at night, when the temple was silent and the sacred flame cast dancing shadows, she sometimes allowed herself to feel the weight of that isolation. 3 years of invisibility had worn her down in ways she hadn't expected. She was 20 now, and she'd spoken perhaps a dozen words that week, had touched no one, had been touched by no one. The festival of Vesta came in June, when Rome celebrated the goddess of hearth and home with offerings and ceremonies. The temple prepared for weeks, scrubbing every surface, arranging elaborate flower displays, practicing ritual chants. Even Emperor Hadrian himself was expected to attend, his first visit since ascending to power 2 years prior. Livia had seen emperors before. Trajan had visited once during her first year, but always from a distance. She had no expectation that this visit would be any different. Emperors didn't notice temple servants. The morning of the festival, Livia was assigned her usual task, tending the sacred flame while the Vestal virgins performed public ceremonies outside. It was actually a privileged position. The flame was the heart of the temple, the goddess's eternal presence. But it also meant she would miss the festivities, would remain hidden while the rest of Rome celebrated. She didn't mind. Crowds made her nervous. The temple filled with the smell of incense as the ceremony began outside. Livia could hear the chants, the prayers, the rustling of the crowd gathered in the forum. She added wood to the fire with practiced precision, adjusting the flames to burn bright for the goddess's festival day. She was so focused on her work that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. "They said the sacred flame burns brightest during festivals," a man's voice said. "But I wanted to see for myself." Livia spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. Emperor Hadrian stood at the entrance to the inner temple, flanked by 2 Praetorian guards, but somehow seeming alone in the way powerful people often did. She dropped immediately to her knees, pressing her forehead to the cool marble floor. "Caesar, forgive me, I didn't hear you approach. You should have been tending the flame," Hadrian interrupted, "which is exactly what you were doing. Rise." Livia stood on trembling legs, keeping her eyes lowered. The emperor was not supposed to be here, in the inner temple where only the Vestal virgins and their servants could enter. But emperors made their own rules. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Slowly, Livia raised her eyes. Emperor Hadrian was perhaps 35 years old, with a neatly trimmed beard, unusual for Roman emperors, and intelligent eyes that seemed to see more than most people's. He was dressed simply, no excessive jewelry, just the purple that marked his status, and an air of absolute authority. He was looking at her with an intensity that made her want to shrink back into invisibility. "What's your name?" he asked. "Livia, Caesar." "Just Livia? No family name?" "My family no longer claims me, Caesar." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "And why are you here, in the temple?" "I'm 20, Caesar. I came here 3 years ago because I'm barren. My family sold me to the temple because I had no other use." The words came out more bluntly than she'd intended, but Hadrian had commanded her to look at him, to speak, and lying to an emperor seemed more dangerous than honesty. "Barren," Hadrian repeated thoughtfully. He moved closer to the sacred flame, studying it. "And so you tend the flame that represents fertility and home, despite being unable to create either. The gods have a sense of irony, Caesar." It was dangerous to say, implying that the gods were cruel, that their choices might be questioned. But Hadrian didn't seem offended. If anything, he smiled slightly. "They do indeed." He turned back to face her fully. "The other servants avoid you, don't they? I've been watching this temple for the past hour. You're always alone, always at the edges. Why?" "They believe my condition is contagious, Caesar, or that bad luck follows those who can't give life. It's easier for everyone if I stay separate. And you accept this?" "Without complaint." "What would protest accomplish, Caesar?" "I have no power, no position, no value beyond the work I perform. Complaining would only make my situation worse." Hadrian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. Livia felt exposed, truly seen, truly noticed, truly considered as something other than an inconvenient piece of furniture. "There's something I've learned in my years of ruling," Hadrian said finally. "The most valuable people are often those who've been taught they have no value. They're honest because they have nothing to gain from lies. They're resilient because they've survived things that would break others. They see clearly because they've been forced to exist on the margins." "I don't understand, Caesar." "I'm saying that I see something in you that everyone else has missed. Something divine, perhaps, though not in the way the priests mean. He gestured to the sacred flame. You tend this fire with absolute devotion, knowing that if it goes out, you die. Yet you show no fear, no resentment. Why? Livia considered carefully. Because the flame doesn't judge me, Caesar. It doesn't care that I'm barren or cursed. It simply burns, and I help it burn. That's peaceful. Simple. Honest. Honest, Hadrian echoed. Yes, that's what I saw in your eyes when I entered. Honesty. The kind of clear-eyed acceptance of reality that's almost impossible to find in the palace, where everyone lies constantly. He turned to one of his guards. Bring High Priestess Metella here, now. The guard departed, and uncomfortable silence filled the space. Livia didn't know what to say, didn't know what the emperor wanted. She kept her eyes on the flame, adding a small piece of wood to maintain consistency. You have beautiful hands, Hadrian observed. Scarred and calloused, but they move with precision. I copy text sometimes, Caesar, in the temple library, when my other duties are finished. Do you enjoy it? Yes, Caesar. Very much. What are you copying currently? Ovid's Metamorphoses. The temple has an old copy that's deteriorating. Ovid. Hadrian smiled more genuinely now. The poet who wrote about transformation, about bodies changing form. Appropriate reading for someone whose own body has defined and limited her entire life. Before Livia could respond, High Priestess Metella arrived, breathless and clearly alarmed. Caesar, she said, dropping into a deep bow. How may I serve you? This girl, Hadrian said, gesturing to Livia. She's a temple servant? Yes, Caesar. She's been here 3 years. Very diligent, never causes problems. And what would happen if I wanted to take her to the palace? Metella's eyes widened. Caesar, she's temple property. We paid her family for her service. And she's barren, Caesar. Cursed. Surely you don't want... I want someone who tends fires with devotion and copies Ovid in her spare time. Hadrian interrupted. I want someone who understands what it means to be judged and found wanting, who speaks honestly because she has nothing left to lose. Whether she can bear children is irrelevant. But Caesar, the gods have shown me my offering, Hadrian said firmly. During the festival of Vesta, while every eye was on the public ceremonies, I was drawn here to this flame, and I found this girl tending it with devotion that puts your Vestal virgins to shame. If that's not a divine sign, I don't know what is. He turned to Livia. I'm taking you to the palace. You'll serve there instead of here. Bring her to the palace, he ordered his guards. The gods have shown me my offering, and I will not refuse their gift. Before Livia could process what was happening, before Metella could protest further, Emperor Hadrian strode from the inner temple, his decision made and absolute. Metella looked at Livia with an expression mixing envy and concern. What did you say to him? Nothing, High Priestess. I just tended the flame. You must have done something. Emperors don't simply take temple servants on whims. There will be talk, Livia. Terrible talk. Let them talk, Livia said quietly, surprising herself. I've been cursed, avoided, and judged for 3 years here. Whatever awaits me in the palace can't be worse. But as the guards escorted her from the only home she'd known for 3 years, Livia wondered if she'd just made a terrible mistake. The emperor had called her his offering, had claimed the gods showed him something divine in her quiet strength. But offerings, Livia knew, were meant to be sacrificed, and she had no idea what altar she was walking toward. The imperial palace was everything Livia had imagined, and nothing she'd expected. Marble corridors stretched endlessly, decorated with frescoes depicting Rome's conquests and glories. Gardens bloomed with flowers from every corner of the empire. Fountains splashed in courtyards where senators and nobles conducted their business in hushed, conspiratorial tones. And everywhere people stared at her. The servants whispered as she passed, their voices carrying just enough for her to hear fragments. The Cursed One, Temple Slave, Emperor's Madness, Divine Punishment waiting to happen. The nobles were more subtle, but no less cruel, their eyes sliding over her with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Livia was given a small room in the servants' quarters, far better than her cell at the temple, with an actual bed and window overlooking the gardens. But she was still separated from the other palace servants, isolated in a corner where her curse wouldn't contaminate anyone else. She was assigned duties in the palace library, which housed thousands of scrolls and texts collected from across the empire. It should have been a dream, surrounded by knowledge, with time to read and copy the works that fascinated her. But even here, the librarians avoided her, leaving her tasks written on tablets rather than speaking to her directly. 3 days after arriving at the palace, she still hadn't seen Emperor Hadrian again. She began to wonder if he'd already forgotten about her, if his divine sign had been nothing more than an impulsive whim that would be dismissed as quickly as it had been declared. Then, on the fourth night, a steward appeared at her door. "The Emperor requests your presence in his private study," the man said, his tone suggesting he found the request distasteful. Immediately, Livia followed him through corridors she'd never seen before, into the private wing of the palace where only the Emperor and his closest advisors were permitted. The study was smaller than she'd expected, lined with scrolls and maps, a large table covered in correspondence, and windows overlooking Rome's lights twinkling in the darkness below. Emperor Hadrian stood at one of the windows, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He was dressed simply again, without any of the formal regalia he wore during public appearances. "Caesar," Livia said, dropping into a curtsy, "you summoned me." "I did." He turned to face her, and she was struck by how tired he looked. "How are you finding the palace?" "It's comfortable, Caesar. More comfortable than the temple. The library is magnificent, but the people treat you the same way they did at the temple, with fear and avoidance and whispers about curses." It wasn't a question. "Yes, Caesar." Hadrian moved to his desk, pouring wine into 2 cups. He offered one to Livia, who took it with trembling hands. Emperors didn't share wine with servants. This intimacy was dangerous, inappropriate, and utterly confusing. "I brought you here because I saw something in you," Hadrian said, returning to the window with his own cup. "Strength, honesty, the ability to tend a flame with devotion despite knowing the world has rejected you. I thought perhaps you might be someone I could speak with honestly, someone who wouldn't lie to please me or scheme for position. I can be that, Caesar, if you wish." "Can you?" "Because already I hear whispers from the nobles. They're saying I've brought a curse into the palace, that the gods will punish Rome for elevating a barren woman, that I'm being influenced by something unholy." He took a long drink of wine. "My advisors are suggesting I send you back to the temple, or to some distant estate where you'll be forgotten." Livia's stomach dropped. She'd been here 4 days, and already she was being dismissed. "I understand, Caesar. If you wish me to leave, I don't wish it." Hadrian turned to face her, his expression intense. "But I need to know. Do you believe you're cursed? Do you think the gods have marked you for punishment?" The question hung in the air between them. Livia thought about the easy answer, the safe answer, the answer that would confirm what everyone already believed and allow her to slip back into the background. But Hadrian had asked for honesty, and honesty was all she had left. "No, Caesar," she said quietly. "I don't believe I'm cursed. I believe my body works differently than most women's bodies. I believe this difference has been interpreted as divine disfavor because people need explanations for things they don't understand. But I've never felt the gods' hatred, never seen any evidence that they care about my fertility one way or another. And if the gods do care, if they are displeased by your presence in this palace, then they're remarkably petty gods, Caesar, concerned more with a woman's womb than with her character, her actions, her devotion. Those wouldn't be gods worth worshipping, in my opinion." It was blasphemy. It was dangerous. It was the kind of statement that could get her executed. But Hadrian laughed, a genuine sound of amusement and relief. "That's what I thought when I saw you at the temple." Here was someone who'd been told she was worthless by everyone, including the gods, yet she continued to tend the sacred flame with perfect devotion. That's not the behavior of someone who believes she's cursed. That's the behavior of someone who knows her own worth, regardless of what others say. He set down his wine cup and moved closer to her. "I'm going to be honest with you, Livia. I didn't bring you here just because I saw strength in you. I brought you here because I'm lonely, surrounded by thousands of people every day, yet utterly alone. Every word spoken to me is calculated, every gesture is political, every smile conceals an agenda. But you have no reason to flatter me, no scheme to advance, no power to gain. You can afford to be honest because you have nothing to lose. That's a sad reason to value someone, Caesar. Perhaps, but it's an honest one." He smiled slightly. "I need someone in this palace who will tell me the truth, who will treat me like a human being rather than a god. Can you do that?" "I can try, Caesar." "Then stay. Ignore the whispers, ignore the nobles' contempt, ignore the servants' fear. Work in the library, copy your texts, tend whatever metaphorical flames need tending. And when I need to speak with someone who sees me as human, I'll summon you. Is that acceptable?" It was more than acceptable. It was the closest thing to purpose Livia had felt in years. But it was also dangerous, this strange intimacy with an emperor. this position of unofficial confidence that would make her enemies among the palace's political factions. "Yes, Caesar," she said. "That's acceptable." "Good." Hadrian returned to his desk, picking up a scroll. "You can go, but Livia," he looked up at her, "don't let them convince you that you're cursed. Don't let them take away the strength I saw in you at the temple. The gods didn't mark you for punishment. They simply made you different, and sometimes being different is exactly what the world needs." Livia left the study with those words echoing in her mind. The Emperor of Rome had called her different rather than defective, had valued her honesty rather than condemning her barrenness, had seen strength where everyone else saw only lack. As she made her way back through the darkened corridors to her room, she passed a group of nobles who fell silent at her approach, their eyes following her with expressions of suspicion and hostility. Let them stare, she thought. Let them whisper and scheme and believe whatever they wanted about curses and divine disfavor. The emperor had asked for her honesty, had created a space where she could exist as something other than invisible or cursed. That was more than her family had given her, more than the temple had offered, more than she dared to hope for. But as she lay in her bed that night, Livia couldn't shake the feeling that this strange reprieve was temporary, that the nobles' whispers would eventually become demands, that the gods, or at least their priests, would find a way to prove she was cursed after all. She'd been given a chance to be something more than the barren girl everyone rejected. The question was whether Rome would let her keep it. 6 months passed, and Livia found a fragile peace in her new life. She worked in the imperial library, copying texts and organizing scrolls. Emperor Hadrian summoned her perhaps once a week to his private study, where they spoke about philosophy, literature, and the burdens of power. He treated her not as a servant, but as a companion, someone whose opinions he valued, whose honesty he craved. But outside those quiet moments, the palace seethed with hostility. The nobles watched her with cold calculation. The servants whispered that she'd bewitched the emperor. The priests muttered about divine displeasure and omens they claimed to see in the flights of birds and the entrails of sacrificial animals. Then the drought began. It started in late summer, when the usual rains simply didn't come. The Tiber River dropped lower than anyone could remember. Wells began to dry up. Crops withered in the fields surrounding Rome. By autumn, the city's grain supply was dangerously low, and people were beginning to panic. The Senate convened emergency sessions. The priests performed elaborate rituals, sacrificing bulls and sheep in increasingly desperate attempts to appease the gods. But the sky remained stubbornly clear. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the drought continued. And with the drought came the whispers. This is punishment. The gods are angry. The barren woman has brought curse upon Rome. Livia heard the rumors even in the library. Servants left offerings of protective herbs near her door. Citizens in the forum pointed and whispered when she passed. Someone painted a crude symbol against evil on the wall near her quarters. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on her work, but the hostility was becoming impossible to dismiss. Then came the night when Emperor Hadrian summoned her to his study with unusual urgency. She found him standing at his window, staring out at the parched gardens below. His posture was rigid, his hands clenched behind his back. "Caesar," Livia said carefully, "you sent for me? The Senate is demanding your death," he said without turning around. His voice was flat, emotionless. "They convened this afternoon and voted nearly unanimously. They say you're the cause of the drought, that the gods are punishing Rome for harboring a cursed woman, that your presence in the palace is an affront to divine order." Livia's blood turned cold. "I see. They want a public execution, a sacrifice to appease the gods and end the drought." He finally turned to face her, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "They're demanding I deliver you to them tomorrow at dawn. And will you?" The question hung between them. Hadrian moved to his desk, pouring wine with shaking hands. "Every rational part of me says this is superstition, that droughts happen naturally, that the gods don't punish cities for the presence of one woman, that you're no more responsible for this than I am." He drank deeply. "But the other part, the part that rules an empire and must sometimes make impossible choices, that part knows that if I refuse, the Senate might turn against me. The people are suffering. They need someone to blame, something to believe in, and you're the convenient answer." "Then give me to them," Livia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I've survived this long by accepting reality. The reality is that Rome needs a sacrifice, and I'm the logical choice. A barren temple servant who was elevated above her station by an emperor's whim. It's almost poetic. I won't do it. Hadrian set down his cup with force. I won't execute someone for the crime of existing differently than others expect. I won't let superstition and fear dictate how I rule. Then what will you do? I don't know yet. He looked at her with something like desperation. Tell me what you would do. If you were emperor, if you had to choose between one person and the stability of the empire, what would you choose? Livia thought carefully. I would choose the empire, because one person's life, mine or anyone else's, isn't worth civil unrest and suffering. That's the logical choice. Logic, Hadrian said bitterly. Rome was built on logic and law, but this situation has nothing to do with either. This is about fear and the need for meaning in random events. A knock at the door interrupted them. A guard entered, his expression grave. Caesar, the priests have gathered in the forum. They're demanding the sacrifice take place tonight rather than tomorrow. They say the gods have sent them a sign. The Tiber has dropped another foot. The people are gathering, and the mood is dangerous. Hadrian closed his eyes briefly. Tell the priests I'll address them within the hour. After the guard left, he turned back to Livia. I'm going to make them an offer, a trial of the gods. If they want to claim you're cursed, they'll have to prove it through divine judgment. What does that mean? It means you'll stand before the sacred flame in the forum. If the gods truly find you unworthy, if you're truly cursed, they'll show it through their fire. And if they don't, he didn't finish the sentence. And if they do show I'm cursed, if the flame goes out or some other omen appears, then I'll have to let them execute you, because I'll have no argument left against the Senate's will. He moved closer to her. But I don't believe you're cursed, Livia. I believe you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, and I'm betting everything on that belief. An hour later, Livia stood in the forum, surrounded by thousands of Romans who'd gathered to watch the spectacle. The priests had built a massive altar, atop which burned the sacred flame brought from the Temple of Vesta. The Senate occupied raised seats to one side. Emperor Hadrian sat on an elevated throne, his expression carefully neutral. Livia was dressed in white, the color of sacrificial victims, and bound with ceremonial cords, not tight enough to hurt, but visible enough to make clear her status as offering rather than citizen. The high priest raised his hands for silence. Citizens of Rome, the gods have sent drought to punish us for harboring a cursed woman. She, who cannot give life, has been elevated above her station, and divine order has been violated. Now we ask the gods to show us their will. If this woman is truly cursed, let the sacred flame show us a sign. The crowd roared approval. Someone threw a rock that landed near Livia's feet. She forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression calm. The high priest approached her with a ceremonial blade. Prepare yourself for judgment. But before he could touch her, Emperor Hadrian rose from his throne. His voice carried across the forum with absolute authority. If the gods demand her life, then they shall take mine first. Shocked silence fell over the crowd. Hadrian descended from the throne and strode to the altar, drawing his sword. He placed the blade against the altar's edge, the metal resting just inches from the sacred flame. I am Emperor of Rome, he declared, chosen by the Senate, confirmed by the gods, responsible for the welfare of the empire. If someone must be sacrificed for this drought, it should be me, not a woman whose only crime is being different than you expect. Caesar, you cannot, the high priest began. I can, and I will. Hadrian's eyes swept the crowd. If the gods want blood, let them take mine. If they want a cursed life ended, let them end the life of the man who defied your superstitions by bringing this woman into the palace. But I will not stand by while you execute someone for the crime of existing. He touched his blade to the altar, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then the sky split with thunder. The sound was so sudden, so violent, that people fell to their knees in terror. Lightning cracked across the heavens, and rain, blessed, impossible rain, began to fall. Not a gentle drizzle, but a deluge. Water poured from the sky as if the gods had been holding it back and finally released it all at once. The sacred flame sputtered, then blazed even brighter, burning impossibly hot and bright despite the rain. The crowd erupted into chaos, some fleeing, some falling prostrate, some crying out in wonder or fear. The priests stared at the sky as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. And Livia, bound in white and waiting for death, felt the rain on her face and understood that she'd just witnessed either the greatest coincidence in Roman history or actual divine intervention. She wasn't sure which frightened her more. The rain fell for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. The Tiber swelled back to its normal levels. The parched fields drank deeply. The citizens of Rome danced in the streets, filling every vessel they owned with the precious water they'd been denied for months. Temples overflowed with grateful worshippers, bringing offerings to thank the gods for their mercy. And at the center of it all stood Livia, no longer the cursed woman, but something far more dangerous. A symbol. The priests who had demanded her death now declared her blessed. The senators who had voted for her execution now praised Emperor Hadrian's divine wisdom in protecting her. The people who had thrown stones now left flowers at the palace gates, asking for her blessing. Livia found the transformation more terrifying than the hostility had been. She was confined to the palace during those 3 days, ostensibly for her own protection, but really because no one knew quite what to do with her. She was too important to remain a simple library servant, but too controversial to be given any official position. She existed in a strange limbo, neither servant nor noble, neither cursed nor fully accepted. On the 4th day after the reign began, Emperor Hadrian summoned her to his private chambers. She found him standing at his window again, watching the rain-soaked gardens below. But this time his posture was relaxed rather than rigid. "They're calling you the bringer of rain," he said without turning around. "The woman who broke the curse. Some are even suggesting you're a goddess incarnate, sent to test Rome's faith. I'm none of those things, Caesar. You know that. I know that. You know that. But does truth matter when the story people want to believe is so much more compelling?" He finally turned to face her. "The high priest came to me this morning. He wants to formally declare you sanctified by the gods, to give you a position in the temples, to make you a symbol of divine favor." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that your status would be determined by me, not by priests who wanted you dead 4 days ago." Hadrian moved to his desk where a scroll lay open. "But he's right about one thing. We can't simply pretend nothing happened. Half of Rome watched the rain begin the moment I touched my blade to that altar. They watched the sacred flame burn brighter in the downpour. They believe they witnessed a miracle, and that belief has power regardless of whether it's true." "What are you saying, Caesar?" "I'm saying that I have to make a decision about your future, about what role you'll play in this empire." He looked at her intently. "The Senate is suggesting I marry you." Livia felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "They say the gods have shown clear favor, that the drought ended only when I stood beside you and pledged my protection, that Rome needs an empress who carries divine blessing." He smiled without humor. "Yesterday they wanted you dead. Today they want you crowned. Such is the nature of politics. But I'm Barren, Caesar. An empress needs to provide heirs. I have nephews for succession, and I'm not asking you to marry me because of political pressure." He moved closer to her. "I'm asking because these past 6 months have shown me something I didn't expect. You're the only person in this palace who treats me like a human being, the only one who speaks truth instead of flattery, the only one who doesn't want something from me except honest conversation. That's not a reason to marry someone, isn't it? I've watched imperial marriages based on bloodlines and political alliances. I've seen emperors with wives they despise, living separate lives in the same palace. I've seen what happens when marriage is purely transactional." He took her hands, the first time he'd ever touched her. "I'm offering you a choice, Livia, not a command. You can refuse, and I'll find another solution. I'll give you an estate, a title, enough wealth to live comfortably anywhere in the empire. You'll be free to choose your own path, and if I accept, then you'll be Empress of Rome. You'll face hostility from nobles who resent your rise. You'll be scrutinized constantly, judged for every action, blamed for every misfortune. But you'll also have power, real power, to change things, to help people who've been rejected like you were, to show Rome that worth isn't determined by bloodlines or fertility." Livia pulled her hands away, moving to the window. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city washed clean and glistening. She thought about her parents, who had sold her for being worthless, about the temple that had isolated her for being cursed, about the forum that had wanted her dead just days ago. And she thought about the sacred flame that had burned bright in the rain, about the impossible timing of that storm, about whether the gods had truly intervened or if it was just extraordinary coincidence. "I don't believe in miracles," she said quietly. "I think the rain would have come eventually, drought or no drought, sacrifice or no sacrifice. I think we happened to be at the altar at exactly the right moment, and people interpreted that timing as divine will because they needed something to believe in. I think you're probably right. But I also know that what people believe matters more than what's actually true. Rome believes I'm blessed now. That belief has power, regardless of whether it's based on reality. She turned to face him. If I become empress, I'll be a symbol whether I want to be or not. Every action I take will be interpreted as divinely inspired or divinely punished. I'll never just be Livia again. I'll always be the barren empress who brought the rain. Is that a yes or a no? It's an acknowledgement of what I'll be accepting. She moved closer to him. I've spent my entire life being told I had no worth, that my body's failure made me less than human, that the gods had cursed me for reasons I couldn't control, and now those same people want to crown me because of a rainstorm. So what will you do? Livia thought about the girl who'd been sold by her family, who'd spent 3 years tending a flame in isolation, who'd accepted her fate without complaint because resistance seemed pointless. That girl was gone, burned away by the past 6 months, by the trial at the altar, by the impossible choice now before her. I'll accept, she said. Not because I believe I'm blessed, but because I can use this power to change things for others like me, the rejected, the cursed, the ones society decides are worthless. If I'm going to be a symbol anyway, I might as well make that symbol mean something. Hadrian's expression softened into something that might have been relief or admiration, or perhaps both. Then we'll announce the engagement tomorrow. The wedding will take place in a month, giving the priests time to prepare appropriate ceremonies and the Senate time to adjust to the idea. They'll object, some of them at least. Let them object. I'm the emperor. My word is law. He smiled slightly. Besides, after watching the gods apparently intervene on your behalf, most of them will be too afraid to protest too loudly. That night, alone in her quarters, Livia stood at her window and looked out at the rain-washed city. Somewhere out there, her parents were probably hearing the news, that the daughter they'd sold for being worthless would soon be Empress of Rome. She wondered what they felt. Regret? Pride? The calculating satisfaction of knowing they were now connected to imperial power? She decided she didn't care. The wedding took place on the steps of the Temple of Vesta, a choice heavy with symbolism. The same temple that had taken her as a cursed servant now hosted her coronation as empress. The same priests who had isolated her now blessed her union with elaborate ceremonies. The same sacred flame she'd tended in isolation now burned bright as thousands watched her crowned. Livia wore purple and gold, her hair arranged in the traditional style of Roman brides, a veil of silk covering her face. Emperor Hadrian stood beside her in full imperial regalia, and when he lifted her veil, he smiled with what looked like genuine warmth. "You're trembling," he whispered. "I'm terrified," she whispered back. "Good. That means you understand what we're doing." He took her hands. "We're rewriting what's possible, showing Rome that worth isn't predetermined by birth or biology. That's worth being terrified about." The high priest pronounced them married before the gods and Rome. The crowd erupted in cheers. Genuine or performed, Livia couldn't tell and decided it didn't matter. She was no longer the barren girl her parents had sold. She was no longer the cursed servant isolated in the temple. She was Empress Livia, and whether through divine intervention or extraordinary coincidence, she'd been given a power she'd never imagined possessing. The question now was what she would do with it. As Hadrian led her through the cheering crowds, as flowers rained down from the buildings lining their path, as the entire city celebrated the wedding of their emperor to the woman they now called Blessed, Livia made herself a promise. She would not forget where she'd come from, would not forget the girl who'd been sold, isolated, rejected, nearly executed, would not forget that worth was assigned by others but could be reclaimed by choice. She would be an empress unlike any Rome had seen before, and she would make sure that the miracle they claimed to witness, the barren woman who brought life to Rome through love rather than childbirth, actually meant something beyond superstition and spectacle. The rain had ended. The drought was over. The curse was broken. Now came the harder part, actually changing the world that had created those curses in the first place. But as she stood beside Hadrian on the palace balcony, looking out at the city that had tried to kill her and now celebrated her, Livia felt something she'd never experienced before. Hope, not the desperate, fragile hope of someone waiting for rescue, but the fierce, determined hope of someone who'd finally gained the power to rescue herself and others like her. The gods may or may not have intervened at that altar, but Livia would make sure their intervention, real or imagined, mattered. That was the only miracle that truly counted. 10 years passed, and Rome transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The changes began small. Empress Livia quietly funded schools for girls whose families considered them worthless. The barren, the deformed, the ones with dowries too small to secure marriages. She established workshops where women could learn trades beyond weaving. She used her position to champion legal reforms that gave women more control over their own property and bodies. The Senate grumbled. The traditionalists called her reforms dangerous. But Emperor Hadrian supported every initiative, and the common people, who remembered the drought and the rain and the cursed girl who became empress, loved her with a devotion that transcended political calculation. Livia walked among them during festivals, speaking to merchants and craftsmen, remembering what it felt like to be invisible and powerless. She never forgot the girl sold by her family, the servant isolated in the temple, the offering bound in white, waiting for execution. Those memories fueled everything she did. On a warm evening in late spring, Livia stood in the palace gardens, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She was 30 now, no longer the frightened girl brought here a decade ago. Silver threaded through her dark hair. Lines marked the corners of her eyes. She'd grown into the title of Empress, had learned to wield power with the same quiet devotion she'd once used to tend the sacred flame. "You're thinking too loudly." Hadrian's voice came from behind her. "I can hear it from across the garden." She turned to find her husband approaching, dressed simply as he preferred when they were alone. He was 45 now, his beard fully gray, showing the first signs of age. But his eyes still held the intelligence and warmth that had drawn her to him. "I was thinking about my parents," she admitted. "They sent a letter last month, asking to visit, to meet the empress they once sold for 40 silver pieces. And what did you tell them?" "Nothing yet. I'm still deciding." She sat on a stone bench, and Hadrian joined her. "Part of me wants to refuse, but another part remembers that they were just people doing what they thought necessary. They weren't cruel. They were practical in a cruel world. What will you do?" "I'll see them, once. Let them say what they need to say. Then they can return to Tibur." She looked at him. "Is that weak? Understanding is harder and more meaningful than vengeance." Hadrian took her hand. "You've built an empire of second chances, Livia. It would be strange if you didn't offer the same to your own family." "I haven't built anything. I've just used the position you gave me." "No, you've built something remarkable. You've shown Rome that worth isn't determined by bloodlines or fertility." He gestured toward the city. "Do you know what they call you in the streets? Mater Terrae, Mother of the Earth, not because you've borne children, but because you've given life to ideas that were dying, hope to people who had none." "That's just propaganda." "Is it? I've watched you for 10 years. I've seen you turn palace funds into schools. I've seen you sit with dying plague victims when every noble fled. You've given life to this empire in ways that matter far more than producing heirs." Livia was quiet. "Do you ever regret it? Choosing me instead of some noble daughter who could have given you children? Built alliances?" "Never." Hadrian's voice was firm. "I've had a decade of honest partnership with someone who sees me as human rather than divine. I've watched you change Rome, and I've been genuinely happy in ways I never expected. Why would I regret any of that? Because I'm still Barren, still the cursed girl everyone originally rejected. You were never cursed. You were just different, and thank all the gods that you were." He stood, pulling her up. "Come, there's something I want to show you." He led her to his private study, where a marble tablet sat on his desk. Livia recognized it, a memorial inscription, the kind placed in the forum after an emperor's death. "You're planning your own memorial?" "Every emperor does." He gestured to the inscription. "Read the last line." She scanned the Latin text, conquests, reforms, building projects. Then her eyes reached the final sentence. "But his greatest achievement was recognizing worth where others saw only lack, and choosing love over tradition." "That's what I want Rome to remember," Hadrian said quietly. "Not the provinces I secured or buildings I erected, but the fact that I chose you. That we built something together that defied every expectation. That we showed an empire that change is possible." Livia felt tears burning. "You're getting sentimental. I'm getting honest." He pulled her close, and she rested her head against his shoulder. "When historians write about us, they'll debate whether the rain at your trial was divine intervention or coincidence. But none of that matters compared to the simple fact that we chose each other when the world said we shouldn't. That's the real miracle." Years later, long after both had died, historians did debate those questions. Some claimed Empress Livia had been blessed by the gods. Others insisted the entire narrative was propaganda. But the common people remembered something simpler. They remembered the girl who'd been sold for being worthless and became priceless. They remembered the empress who'd never borne children but gave birth to hope for everyone society had rejected. They remembered that she'd stood before an altar waiting for execution and walked away crowned. They called her Mater Terrae, Mother of the Earth. She hadn't given life through her womb. She'd given life through her choices, her courage, her refusal to accept that worth was determined by others. The schools she founded continued for generations. The legal reforms she championed slowly expanded women's rights. The example she set, of dignity maintained in the face of rejection, echoed through Roman history. On the day her parents finally visited the palace, they found a woman transformed, not by crown or power, but by the simple act of choosing to believe she had worth. Her father wept. Her mother couldn't speak. Instead, Livia gave them tea in the garden and spoke politely, without warmth or coldness. "I don't forgive you," she told them calmly. "What you did still hurt, still shaped me. But I understand why you made that choice. And I've built a life beyond that hurt. You don't have power over me anymore. You're simply people I used to know." It wasn't the reunion her mother hoped for. It wasn't the confrontation her father feared. It was an acknowledgement that some wounds heal but leave scars, and scars are part of who we become. They left after an hour, returning to Tibur knowing their daughter had become someone they could never fully understand. And Livia returned to her work, the schools, the reforms, the endless task of changing an empire one choice at a time. That evening, Hadrian found her in the library. "How was it?" he asked. "Necessary." She set down her scroll. "They wanted me to say it was all worth it. That being sold led to becoming empress. But I couldn't give them that comfort. The pain was real. You're allowed to still hurt, I know. But I've turned that hurt into something useful, something that helps others." She moved to the window. "That's the real miracle. Not the rain at the altar, but the ability to take rejection and transform it into compassion and change." "That's not a miracle," Hadrian said. "That's just you. The gods didn't bless you, Livia. You blessed yourself by choosing to see your worth even when no one else would." Below them, Rome stretched endlessly, a city of marble and ambition, of beauty and cruelty. Livia had been sold into it as a cursed girl worth 40 silver pieces. She would leave it as an empress whose reforms would outlast her name. And when people asked if she regretted not having children, if being barren still hurt, she would smile. "I gave life to Rome itself, not through children, but through proving that worth isn't inherited or biological. It's chosen. It's claimed through actions and refusing to let anyone define you except yourself." What greater gift could there be? The sacred flame she'd once tended had passed into other hands, but the fire she'd lit, of hope, of change, of the radical idea that rejected people could still have value, that burned on, and it would continue burning long after empires fell, because some flames once kindled are eternal, not because gods tend them, but because humans choose to.